Welcome to the Courage Never Quits podcast, where members of the West Point class of 1986 tell their stories. I'm your host, Paul LaFontaine. My guest today is Mark Wolf, Cullum number 43834. We'll hear about Mark's work from the gullies of the National Training Center to the operations centers of the Army Reserve. As always, the views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants, and not of West Point, the Army, or any other organization, most particularly the Association of the United States Army. Mark Wolf, welcome to the podcast.
How are you? How are you doing today, Paul?
Tab, doing great. Tell me your favorite thing about being a West Point graduate.
I mean, mainly it's the friends that I made. I think that's the thing I cherish the most is all the folks that we spent time with, grew up with, struggled with. And that's something, I see as a thing. Somewhere probably a year ago, and it's met up with some ROTC cadets at an event. And I was just chatting with them. And one of the comments I made is, you make friends now and you realize that those are the guys you cherish knowing, regardless of where they came from. The West Pointers, we have a little bit of an advantage because we all went to the same school.
I think the decisive advantage we had was we were denied music. And so it forced us to entertain each other as plebes in our first year. We did not have any music or no boom boxes, nothing in the first 6 months. So we had to entertain each other by playing spoons and singing, if you recall.
Well, it's that, and your days were always so busy that you had stuff going on all the time.
Absolutely. Let's go back to 1981, Mark Wolf.
Yeah.
What was it? Where were you at? What was going on? What was it about West Point that caught your eye that eventually led you there?
Well, I'd always had an interest in history, in military history. My dad was kind of a Civil War guy. I kind of liked World War II, but he used to take us around to wherever we lived, and we lived a lot of places. He'd been in the Air Force. We'd go visit like the Air and Space Museum, the Air Force Museum in Dayton. We'd go to Manassas, the battlefield there. Since I remember 4th and 5th grade being interested in stuff, building models, stuff like that. And so I always had an interest in the military. West Point, I don't even remember if we visited. I think we visited West Point one time because we lived in New York. We lived down on Long Island. And I think we visited it one time before I went there, before I applied things.
And as a high schooler, were you an athlete? Were you a scholar? What was it that, what was your standout?
We're doing a little bit of a combination, I think, as everybody was in our year. I took a lot of classes, took a lot of AP classes, did pretty well in my studies. I know I was probably like top 10% of my class, around the 10 percentile. I ended up played lacrosse, played soccer, fenced in high school.
You fenced in high school?
Yeah, it was one of the few places.
Come on now. How cool is that?
Yeah, a buddy of mine was on the team.
Right.
And they needed a manager. So I said, hell, I'll help. I'm not doing anything after school. I'll help. And being 6'4" was an advantage.
You're a tall man, so you had to
say, let's teach you how to do
try this out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
I ended up doing pretty well. Yeah, I did a lot of stuff.
Now we were comparing notes before we got on, and we were in the same Beast company, so Beast Barracks, and I remember you as a 6'4" blonde-headed guy in one of the ranks. I don't think we were in the same squad, but I think we were in the same platoon at least. With Mr. Lionel Ortiz was our company commander, famous character from the class of '83. So what did you think of once you hit the ground? What were your reactions after going to all the museums with your dad? And now here you were marching around. What was your thoughts?
I was kind of one of those guys that put my head down and kept my nose at grindstone and tried to you put up with what you had to put up with because you didn't have a choice if you wanted to succeed. I know all of our classmates would who I was friends with would probably tell you, they wish I had studied more because then I would have been in their room less. They would have done better.
Right.
But I was pretty
But,
firmly.
I think we all had thought there was a shortcut, but in the end, there was no shortcut. It was just the grindstone is exactly the only way you could get through it.
Yeah, you just had to. You got a lot of crap sometimes, and which isn't a bad thing because it teaches you to put up with the hard times that come in life, things you got to deal with. First semester wasn't too bad. I had a decent squad leader, a guy who played. Pete Popovich was on the basketball team. His roommate was a guy who did a year at the Citadel before, Bob Keating, who before he became a cadet. So, and he was from near where I lived.
Okay. And this was when you were in B4, the first company?
B4, yeah. Then second semester, I ended up in a squad with Doug Gurian, passed away in the World Trade Center. But he wasn't my roommate. I had a different guy. I had Keith Ramsey and Joel Smith as my roommates, but our squad leader, a guy by the name of Josh Cronin, was one of the biggest flames in the company.
Right.
I remember
just the way it worked, he was matched up with Doug Gurian, who might have been one of our, shall we say, less military-oriented classmates, if the stories about him are remembered and true.
Yeah, Doug was a baseball player.
That's an interesting combination.
Yeah, well, and like I said, we weren't roommates, so I didn't have that. Didn't deal with that. But he, every now I get it from Josh, and I bumped into Josh in probably between 96 2000 I decided to go in a West Point Society of the Silicon Valley golf tournament, and he was there that day too. So we got to talk and chat, and he's practicing law, I think now in the San Jose metropolitan area there. But he's,
it was the whole time he correcting your swing, get your elbow up, get your elbow up.
No, I didn't play with him, thank God, probably. But he was one of those guys who, I remember choking, calling minutes one day. He'd being my squad leader, he'd be sitting in his room, as I'm doing this, and hey, what's for lunch? And I just choked, and he came out, and I remember under my breath, I went, oh, shit. And he was like, what did you say? Still gets me in trouble. But
such outbursts were not encouraged back in the day. They may I don't know about today, but back then not so not so encouraged.
Oh, I'm sure they're not now. But it was a good memory.
A good memory. And now, transitioning upperclassmen, you went to the 2nd Regiment, which is not known to be as much of a haze environment. What was it like transitioning over to I-2?
I-2 was a pretty good company. We had a lot of good people. I ended up in a really good bunch of folks, a lot of friends. Still to this day will run into guys. Heck, and it's the nature of classmates. My middle son went to Radford University in Radford, Virginia, and I was walking down one day, we were out visiting him for something, and went into the hotel lobby, and Randy McElhaney, who's one of my class company mates, was in the hotel lobby because his son was going to.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, he wasn't in Radford. He was in I'm trying to remember, it's Virginia Tech or whichever, but there's another university like a town over, and that was where we were staying. And he just happened to be he was visiting his son that weekend.
That's great. Yeah.
Doing something. So it was always, just the places you run into guys.
I think if we just collected up a compendium of odd classmate sightings, I think that in and of itself would be a fantastic entertainment experience.
I was on my way to or from Korea, bumped into Steve Parker in walking through an airport one day.
Right. I was in Atlanta airport going down an escalator, and Justin Whitney was coming up, and I just shouted out to him, and he waved. It was like one of those, just going right past each other. Is fantastic stuff.
Yeah, the over the years, the number of times you bump into folks, and like I said, now I'm working at AUSA, Association U.S. Army. It's not USAA.
Right. You got to. Some of us get a little confused on the acronym. Yeah. Talk about what it's like working for AUSA, where you live now, and what's your current situation.
Well, I'm in Virginia now. Been here since 2008. Moved here after I got back from Iraq. We did left active duty in '95. Went to the Guard. Went to the Reserve. When I moved to California initially in semiconductor business. Mm-hmm. Had gotten married when I was at advanced course. Ended up having 3 kids. My oldest was, we abandoned him in place because he was finishing his last year of college when we were moving here, and we were in Portland, Oregon area.
You just gave him a map with some milestones and objectives and said, here, meet us on the other side.
Yeah, well, he had 1 year left. So, he finished that, and then he moved down to Dallas. Right. Got a job down there. We got here 2008. My dad was living over by Annapolis, so it was a chance to be near family for a little while. I didn't know how long I'd be here. My middle son, was starting high school. My daughter was in middle school or she might have probably still in elementary school thinking about it. Getting ready to move for a year or so. And then, because my son was in high school, I did asked the Army to leave me in place for 4 years. They did.
And what was your role when you were there? For those of us who don't have a lot of experience with the Reserve and the Guard Reserve.
Well, at that time, I was, as I said, I was active guy, back in active duty doing.
Back in active.
Yeah, active guard and reserve. Yeah, active supporting the Guard or the Reserve. So I was at the chief of the Army
Reserve. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, I was at the chief of the Army Reserve doing their current ops stuff. I mean, we kind of oversaw that we had folks that were down in the Army Ops Center that worked for us that were supporting everything. And when Hurricane Sandy came up, we had guys that worked for us that were part of the team supporting the Army Reserve's response, but they were part of the Army Ops Center team doing it, specializing in our stuff. And I was in kind of a place that now if guys were in the Army Reserve or in the Pentagon, I would run into them.
Yeah.
And Joe Gleason was running the local classmate stuff at that time. And he kind of dropped out for a little bit. So I kind of picked it up and started organizing, get-togethers once a month, lunch, happy hour, go, lunch in the Pentagon, lunch somewhere else, happy hour once in a while, get together. It was fun. And I still do it now because I jokingly tell everybody I might need a job someday. But the reality is I do it because
keeping up with each other is our job now.
Yeah. Because I do enjoy seeing them at some point.
And are you in the same place in Virginia you always were, or did you move a bit there?
No, we've stayed in the same house. We bought it when we moved here. We owned a house because I was no longer on active duty. We bought a house. Actually bought a house. My last assignment at Fort Carson. Then we sold it when we moved to California. Bought a house in California.
You can't just drop. I went to Baghdad and came back and bought a house in Virginia. You got what did you do in Baghdad? What was your role there?
Well, our unit was sending about 300 guys. I was the deployment guy, the operations guy at a training division in Oregon as a full timer. That was kind of the role I'd gotten into. Um, Both as a part-time soldier and as a full-time soldier. I was doing current ops stuff. Deployed as the force manager, the guy who was working with the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines on who they were sending to support us.
And now you were a lieutenant colonel. That's your
Well, no, at that point I was a major.
major. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I'd spent. I didn't make lieutenant colonel until I was back here in D.C.
Okay.
Because I had been I was in one of those positions as a captain that the way the guard worked, you didn't get promoted till you moved to a major's position, and I didn't move to a major's position until I moved to the Army Reserve after 2001.
Okay.
So I got stuck few extra years as a captain,
Right.
which wasn't bad because it actually helped me when it came time to come on active duty as a full timer. Because I think if I had been promoted when I probably should have been, I would have been too close to being promoted to lieutenant colonel, and they wouldn't have accepted me.
So you came back from Baghdad. You were back. How long was it until you decided to move into AUSA territory?
I did 9 years here.
9 years.
Well, no, I did 9 years total. So I got here in 2008. I retired in 2015.
Okay.
So Joe Whitlock was here as the chief of the Army Reserves, XO, I think. And I knew him and said, "Hey, Joe, are there any positions there in DC?" Because that was the way it kind of worked for the Army, the AGRs. You had to kind of like look for where did you want to go next,
right?
Because otherwise you get whatever's left over. When they finally remember that you need to be moved. And I knew I was coming back from Baghdad in April. And if I wasn't proactive, they would decide to move me in like December in the middle of my kid's school year.
Yeah.
Right. So I pushed to kind of get reassigned as soon as I got back.
From being an armor officer to these various positions, active guard and reserve support, all sorts of, what was your favorite job in that whole pantheon? Because I think a lot of us either served on active or we went into a reserve or whatever. What did you like the most?
Well, I always had a lot of good, I always thought had good jobs. They weren't necessarily sexy ones. The one I mean, my first assignment still stands out, I think, because I went to Fort Irwin first. Which,
really?
Yeah, it was me and my beast roommate Jim Nicholas ended up both being the two armor guys. We shared went to the same basic course, went to Fort Irwin together. As a platoon leader in XO, because you didn't do any of the bullshit stuff that you end up having to do in other posts.
Right.
You never were red. You were always it was prep for a mission for a couple of days, go out and do the rotation for 14 days, come back, clean up your stuff, take 4 days off and start it again.
Right.
And you got 2 weeks off in the summer, and around the 4th of July, you got 2 weeks off at Christmas. But other than that, it was, go out, do missions, come back, go out, do missions.
Go out and visit terror on your classmates who were rotating in there.
Well, there was that. And then occasionally I'd stop in and visit them in the Dust Bowl to say hi.
Well, sorry I missed you out there. I was out there quite a bit as I was in the 24th, so we spent a pretty bit of time out there.
Yeah, and then we and the final assignment, I ended up working. I was an XO in for Joe Hampton, who was a firstie in my company, plebe year, and then I ended up going to post staff, working as a protocol guy, handling VIPs. I was a deputy. They had a major that was my boss. We worked directly for the chief of staff and the CG. And that job was probably by far still one of the most interesting jobs I think I ever had
So
anywhere.
you have a clear pattern of finding and working your way into these fascinating jobs that are, I would call them non-traditional, but there are thousands of them, obviously. But um, you have a very unique path. Just looking at your, what was it? Did you network a lot? Did you just keep your eye out, or was it luck? Or
No, this one was more, I think I managed to tick somebody off and they just happened to need somebody there at that time. You know,
okay, well, that's a strategy as well.
yeah, no, I don't, it wasn't necessarily that I cultivated things. It ended up, I think it probably was more, I ended up at the right place at the right time.
Sure.
I got yelled at by Tommy Graves' dad. Dick Rich,
Okay.
Lieutenant General Graves was the third Corps commander. As the Corps commander, it was his policy that if I'm here visiting you, you're picking me up, not the protocol office. And one of the aides decided to ignore that comment and didn't show up in the morning to bring him out to the battle.
Oh boy.
And so Graves, probably more his aide, but Graves, chewed me out. And then went out to the field. His aide talked to the other aide. The other aide denied it. Fortunately, right. General Clark's aide was there and heard that discussion that we had. Graves' aide checked with him, and he went, "Not bold." He was told. And then I wish I could have seen it, because from what I understand, General Graves then commenced to chewing out the 2-star division commander on the top of a hill.
Right.
Pointing fingers in his chest, which would have been a classic thing to see.
It never ends.
Yeah. And then when it came back, his aide was like, the Graves' aide was like, "Don't worry about it. We're good."
Your choice of armor. So it's a discussion point on this podcast that people choose their branch based on actually very tactical small things. So for example, if you hit your head at Fort Knox during our yearling summer, you won't go armor because you figure that's a lifetime of hitting your head. Poor Andy Napoli cut himself, so that knocked him out of the armor corps. You're a tall drink of water, right, sir? I got to tell you, at 6'4", yet you chose armor. So the whole "I'm going to hit my head" hypothesis has to be thrown out, or please address it for the class. How does a tall?
Well, I like I said, my dad it's all my dad's fault. Took us around places. We visited places. I saw tanks. I saw airplanes. My eyes were not good enough to fly. I'd rather be carried by my shit than have to carry my shit, kind of deal.
There you go.
I didn't like walking around with an 80-pound ruck. I'd much rather ride around in a 70-ton piece of steel.
Sure.
And I could have all the coolers and pokey bait I wanted to have with me.
Right.
And like I said, I enjoyed the stuff. I would have been happy. I think I would have been happy if I'd gone infantry, which was my second choice. But I was firmly in the middle of the class because of my study strategy, lack of study strategy.
Well, what was your study strategy? Just dive into that.
Study as much as I needed to pass the classes, but don't bust my ass more. Don't go crazy, pushing too hard, because there wasn't much point. So I was
there you go.
Like in the 400s in class rank out of the 1,000 of us. I was almost, I think I was dead in the center, maybe one or two people off in the branch when it came to, post assignment night.
Right.
So I missed out on all the really cool assignments like 11th ACR and that stuff. I could have gone anywhere in the States if I wanted to, except maybe the 24th. That might have been one of the places that went out early. Couldn't go to Hawaii.
Fort Irwin ended up being a plum assignment.
But Fort Irwin was a nice assignment. Not many people really knew about it. Jimmy was much higher in the class than I was. He took the first of the slot. There were only two in the infantry branch, two in the armor branch.
Is that right? There was only two each branch.
Yeah. And during basic course, they had somebody, because of what Irwin was, it was still fairly new.
Right.
It was only like in about the time we went to West Point that it really started going. And they play, during basic, they had some folks talking about, what goes on at Fort Irwin, and everybody in our basic class is like, holy shit, you're going there? Yeah. Hell, I wish I'd known about this. I'd have taken it instead. but it ended up being one of those places where, when you talk to the guys that were there, they either wanted to be there or somebody hated them and forced them to go there. It was almost
Right.
that kind of or you had the guys, they wanted to go there because they thought it was going to be a cool place to be.
I thought it was. I went out there for a visit, and that's where I saw Jay Mellon, who was in the infantry battalion, and Dave Baum. Those were the two from our class who went there, and both good friends. And I was just amazed. I thought it was the cool. I was an MI officer. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. You guys had all this symbols of a fake red regiment, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever.
And it was a blast to do it. I mean, like I said, you go out, you prep for a battle, you fight the battle. The days, if you weren't actively participating in something or doing something, you went back to the rear for a day or two,
right?
Then went back out again. I think I spent in total, I think there was one time where I might have spent 6 or 7 nights out without relief, but that was the oddity. Normally it'd be like 2-3 nights, sometimes 4. You'd spend about 4 nights out there in the field at most at a time. You do
lurking
something
behind the whale so you could pop out and wipe out half of the battalion, right?
Yeah, sometimes we'd lurk behind the whale. We knew all the spots. I mean, that was the thing. I went back. I did a total of I think 37 rotations in the Op 4.
That's amazing.
I did 12 while I was in protocol, and I went back I went to Korea after advanced course, came back, went to Carson, and I did 2 at Fort Carson in the Blue Force. One as the movement officer for brigade, in the S4, and one as a BMO. And after 3.5 years of living in the desert, driving around, I pretty well knew where to go, knew how to find.
You knew your way around that place. That's for sure.
And when I was the assistant S4, and when I was the BMO too, I'd listen to the op order. I'd pull out a 3x5 card. I'd write down what the op 4 was going to do.
Yeah.
Fold it up, stick it in my pocket, and look at the guys and say, "I'll show you afterwards."
Right.
And I was usually pretty close.
If you can recall in 37 rotations, what unit really distinguished themselves when they went out there where you guys said, wow, those guys were great?
One that stood out in my head, and it was one of the battalions, not the whole. It was a 3rd ACR rotation.
Mm-hmm.
And they had M1A1s and tow caps, which was the tow missile mounted on a pedestal on a 113. Not even the hammerheads, not even the old hammerhead ones. They hadn't gotten those yet. They hadn't gotten the Bradleys yet. They had the M1A1s, but not the Bradleys yet. And there was one of their squadrons that had done so well at figuring out how to bore sight the miles,
right?
That they were tagging us well before we could get them,
right?
But the other squadron was worthless. I mean, the other squadron
one of them just had it.
Yeah.
Did you back channel? Did you guys ever figure out what it was about them that?
Well, that was what it came down to. They had a really good. They had a really good command team, and they had practiced and tested. I mean, they did a lot of the same stuff we did, which is send a vehicle out and shoot it, have it move and shoot it, have it move and shoot it. Make sure that you can hit the target to the maximum range you possibly can, and that your sights are lined in at the maximum possible range that you can kill.
That's so interesting, right? So they really understood Yeah, no, which is great command, right? Understanding the
Yeah.
technology and let's
And
say,
then and then set up your engagement area so you know if they're past this, engineer stake out there that you put out there, don't bother shooting at them because you're not going to kill them
right,
because they're too far away.
right.
Wait till they get past there and then start killing everybody that's inside that distance.
Back then, before all the combat experience that defined the Army later, that was a make or break. How you performed out there was a career maker or breaker out there, right?
Yeah. Whereas today, I'd argue, well, maybe not as much now, but in the 2009, 10, 11, 12 timeframe, you had RC units that were as experienced as AC units because they've been to Baghdad, they've done the training, they've done it, they were identified as getting ready to deploy, and they spent a year getting ready or a year and a half getting ready. And those same guys deployed, trained, exercised, went to war and came back. And 3 years later, they went again, maybe in a different position. So by the time they were, 10 years in, they had 3, not NTC rotations, they had 3 deployments under their belts, where they spent a year fighting real operations, doing real planning, watching, and the consequences were higher than what we thought we dealt with.
For sure.
I flat out knew that when I was going across an open area, I might get killed. My light might go off.
Yeah.
And I kind of had a fatalism. A lot of guys didn't understand that, well, why'd you get killed? Because it was my time. Because some guy just happened to be looking at me at the right time.
Point, right? Yeah.
At the, another day I'd have made the dash across that open area. Today I didn't.
Right.
They'd have been looking the other way. Somebody's got to go over the wall first, out of the trench first, or nobody goes. And this, we end up in the, thinking about the All Quiet on the Western Front, the World War I battlefield. Somebody's got to go over out of the trench and across no man's land, or this just doesn't ever end. Sometimes you just got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
And if you lose, you would have been killed in real life. But if you didn't do that, then the 3 guys that did get across, that ended up taking out the guy that killed you, wouldn't have ever gotten across.
Right. And that's part of the weird calculus of military leadership, right?
Go back to the protocol job. Sitting on top of the hill with the chief of the German armor branch, a German brigadier general, watching a movement to contact. I don't remember the division. I remember it was one of Graves' rotations, though. He was there. And the one and only time I saw it, the unit, it was only a battalion, came out of their assembly area, started a movement to contact. There was 12 kilometers between the lead team and the trailing teams, which is well out of support range.
Right.
And the OPFOR commenced to roll them up one company at a time.
Right.
And the German general looked at me and said, why do you let it continue? Why don't you stop it and have them go back and start over? And my answer was, if we do that, it won't hurt as much and they won't learn.
Yeah.
And sure enough, the first time I'd ever seen it, Graves told the CAG, the chief of the COG, Chief Operations Group, pull them back, have them do it again tomorrow.
Yeah.
The only time I ever saw an operation, a mission, reset and refought the following day.
After what was probably a very pointed and uncomfortable after-action review.
Yes. Because they did not, they didn't realize, nobody in their talk realized that they were out of mutual supporting range and told the lead unit, slow the hell down.
Yeah.
Until the guys behind you catch up. which is what the German guy was looking at it, going,
Yeah.
"This is stupid." I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, you're right, but they're not going to learn.
And the lesson on that day was burned into the brains of every officer and senior NCO in that unit.
Yeah,
They'll never forget that day, nor the gentle and graceful feedback I'm sure they got after.
yeah. And like I said, here I am. That was probably 1990,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah.
And here we are, 35, almost 35 years later. I
You,
remember it like
you
it was
remember
yesterday.
that 12-kilometer spread?
Yeah. Oh, and the trail team was 12 kilometers behind the guys in the middle. It was a task force diamond.
Yeah.
There was no, these guys were 24 kilometers front to back. There
We could have
was no,
our own podcast on just NTC stories.
yeah, there
Um,
was no
the
way this was
forgotten
working.
corner of all this with for the right reasons, events
Yeah,
overcame a simple training exercise. That is an amazing facility at a time when there wasn't very much budget. It
yeah,
was amazing the experiences we had out there that prepared us for Desert Storm. Frankly, I mean,
yeah, exactly. And when I left, Desert Storm was kicking off. I went out. Jim stayed behind because he took over as Wes Clark's aide. Uh, Paul Funk was the first CG I remembered.
mm-hmm.
When I was in protocol, Wes Clark came in. Um, and, I went I did advanced course, got married, went to Fort Sill, got married, went to Korea for a year, came back, and I was in Sill going through advanced course when Desert Storm was fought.
Mm-hmm.
On my way to Korea.
Yeah.
Because the only place they weren't reassigning people from was Korea. If you were going to Korea, you were going
and
to
Hawaii.
Korea.
Jim Crawford tells me that the
Well,
guys in
probably,
Hawaii
yeah.
keep an eye on the Asia Pacific, and that was that.
They were worried about something happening in the Korean Peninsula.
Yeah, 100%.
And they didn't want. Yeah, so the guys when I got there were guys that had been there on a 1 year rotation that had been there for 15 months. And
right.
Finally left.
Because while that was going on in the Middle East, the Korean situation hadn't changed since the 50s. Really unique career, and just from your stories, we can tell that you've had a chance to see some of the really fascinating perspectives of different types of service. Looking back now, kind of 20 years, 25 years back, what advice would you give yourself if you had the chance?
Partly, it would have been, stay in contact with friends, family. It's one thing I suck at. There are a lot of old friends that I've lost touch with, mostly my own fault. Probably would have studied more in school. Probably don't know it would have changed anything. I'm doing a master's degree now. Probably should have done that 10 years ago. Because I'm doing data analytics in my work. So decided it would be a good thing to get a master's in so that when I do finally leave this job, it's something I could do as a part-time job for classmates that need help on something.
Mm-hmm. Describe at least what you did.
Yeah. Like I said, I got better when I deployed, but there are classmates. It's generally easier to find because there's ways to track them down. There's some like Brian McGowan that was in my company that nobody knows where he is now. We've lost touch with him. There's guys like Hojo, Howard Johnston, and Mark McCoy, who, we played lacrosse together our first year in intramurals that were good friends. And they both have passed away now. Terrence Green, I met, you and I were talking about because of the TAPS article, I was working on that. He's another guy who was just a fabulous human being. Brian was a lot in the same way, and I wish I knew where the hell he was.
What's the best way to get a hold of you? So as we all continue to connect, what's your preferred way that people can reach out?
I'm on Facebook. You can find me there. I'm on my email. It's still, I know it's the same one as is in the register.
Okay, good.
Folks can put it out.
We'll get more dinner invites for you.
Yeah. Hence going back to the comment I made at the ROTC cadets, make friends, stay friends, keep in touch.
Yeah.
Since I moved here to Virginia in 2008, my dad passed away a year later, sadly. My mother and dad divorced when I was in West Point, separated when I was in high school. My mom died in 2019. About 7 months ago, my oldest son died of cancer.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
And it's, there's a lot of stuff that makes me realize spending time with family is important, and staying in touch and making folks realize you love them.
Yeah, we only have a limited time. It's wise words, my words.
Yeah.
Mark Wolf, fellow Beast company mate and friend, and we're now reconnected for sure. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and to stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe buttons. With 954 living graduates in the class, we have a lot of stories to collect, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.